Well, hello, everyone, wherever you happen to be listening to us today, and you are listening to Unstoppable Mindset. I am your host, Mike Hingson. And one of the fun things about Unstoppable Mindset is I get to meet lots of interesting people, lots of people who know things that I know nothing about. And what really is joyous for me is I get to learn a lot about, or at least some about, everything that they want to talk about. And I get to learn a lot, which I really enjoy. Today, we have a person who is also very unique for me in terms of the podcast. He's a knight. He's a knight of the Royal Order of Constantine the Great and St. Helen, Sir James Gray Robinson. And I guess I'll call him Sir James, but he is here. He is also a lawyer, and I'm not going to give you any more information than that because he can tell it all better than I can. So, Sir James, I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset, and we're really glad you're here.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. I know you've done great things with this podcast.
It's a lot of fun, and as I say, I do like to learn, and I kind of take the philosophy that if I'm not learning at least as much as everyone else who listens to it, then I'm not doing my job well. And I think life is all about learning, and it's always so much fun to have the opportunity to do it.
Well, I have a saying that, all life is about learning. I mean, that's the people always want to know their purpose and what their destiny is and all of that sort of stuff. But actually, I think that the reason we're here is to learn
Mm-hmm.
and to experience. And the more we can experience, the more we can learn. Because the stuff we learn from books really at times is very difficult to apply because we don't have it. That's the difference between information and knowledge. Because information is just data that we input into our brains, but knowledge is stuff we experience.
Yeah.
And so stuff that our knowledge is much more important than whatever information we have at our disposal.
I think that the the whole aspect of knowledge and the things that we get from knowledge can certainly be started by what information we get from books and from other places. But you're right. It doesn't really mean a lot unless you really can take it to heart. And you can't do that until you experience it in some way.
Well, for example, as a little boy, I would read copious books about Knights of the Round Table and King Arthur and romantic novels about ancient England and all
Mm-hmm.
of that kind of stuff. But that was just a story until I actually became a knight. Then it became real. And then I had to sit there and reassess, what does chivalry mean? And how do I apply that to my life? And so it's been a wonderful experience and a journey to actually go back to something as old as that and to apply it into my present life. And it's been really educational and gratifying.
How long have you been a knight?
2 years.
Okay. And taking it to heart, it's a pretty awesome responsibility, I would think.
Well, we have, this is an organization of very successful people who are invited to join. You don't apply by yourself. You have to be
Mm-hmm.
nominated by a fellow knight. You have to go through a rigorous vetting process. And then if you're fortunate enough to be inducted, then it's a honor, quite frankly. And
Yeah.
so, however, it does come with responsibilities and it does come with duties. And we do have a code of ethics, and it's trying to live your best life, the most with the most integrity you can muster. And so it's you don't want to bring ill repute on the royal order. It's the oldest royal order in existence. It started in 311 and 312 AD, and it's much older than, say, the British
Right.
periods because that was started in the the 13th and 14th centuries. So it's something, it's a long tradition. It's done a lot of good work. We're basically a charitable organization. We sponsor 5 charities, and it's really has been uh, a wonderful experience. And I get to call myself sir.
Well, I was thinking
He
from a
knows that.
I hear you. I was thinking from a responsibility standpoint, more of the emotional, not obligation, but the emotions that anyone who becomes a knight has been deemed to be worthy to possess about their own lives and their own attitude. And you are a person that takes that to heart, which is really so cool.
Thank you. And if anybody is interested, please go to myroyalorder.org and you can find out more about it.
Well, cool. myroyalorder.org. Well, cool. Well, let's go back. I'd love to learn kind of. It's always fun to start at the beginning, as they say. So I'd love to kind of learn about the early James growing up and all that. Let's start there.
I am a third generation lawyer. My grandfather was a judge in the Depression era in Eastern North Carolina, and he often got paid with livestock,
Yeah,
chicken, pigs,
sure.
that sort of thing. And even though there wasn't much money, they considered themselves quite well off because they had plenty to eat and they had clothes on their back, and they thought they were uh, well placed.
And a good home. And
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. And there was prestigious. Being a judge was some prestige back then, and it was and it was a basically something that is very traditional in my family for generations is service.
Mm-hmm.
My father was a very well-known national lawyer. He was a trial lawyer, and he represented big corporations and big litigation, and went to the Supreme Court and all those wonderful things. And he was very influential in my decision to become a lawyer. And I became a trial lawyer in 1978 and practiced until 2004, at which time I experienced something a lot of attorneys are experiencing now, but not so much in 2004, and it's called burnout. They didn't have that term back then. You called it a nervous breakdown. And so I'm not, it's probably more accurate to say I had a nervous breakdown because what happened was the stress and anxiety and pressure that I put upon myself actually ended up flicking a switch in my brain that basically shut me down,
Mm.
and never saw it coming. I was right in the middle of a very successful career. I had awards. I was highly ranked, I rated, and was doing everything right. And everybody knew that law was stressful. It was just expected that you just kind of white knuckle it and uh, march through.
Mm-hmm.
And they really they weren't paying much attention to the emotional and mental aspects of that stress and what it was doing to people's personal lives. And so it was a really unpleasant experience, to say the least. But as a result of that, I decided I wanted to find out what happened to me because, as I said, I was very successful and making lots of money. And I couldn't understand why in the world would my brain just shut down like that. And I was overwhelming panic and all that sort of stuff. I did not know anything about PTSD. That was something that military people got. And it was not until after years of study and research and training did I understand what really was happening to my mind and to my brain. And so as a result of that, and after all that study, what I do now is I focus mainly on lawyers who are going through the same experience. And I teach them how to learn to live with it with grace and resilience. And because it's not just a matter of willpower, because there are actually neurological things that happen when you are under that much stress for that long a period of time. And I always kind of joke that I was at DEF CON 5 24 hours a day,
Hmm.
and it was relentless. Little did I know that if you don't do something about that, then you're going to burn out. It's inevitable because our brain is very good at keeping us alive. And when we're under that kind of stress for that period of time, our brain just shuts down. It's like a circuit breaker. And so after I experienced that, and after I discovered what you can do to avoid that, I felt a mission to go and help lawyers who are experiencing that. I mean, in 2016, the ABA did a survey with Hadley Hazleton recovery centers, and they had some pretty startling statistics. They interviewed 17,000 active lawyers, and the statistics weren't very good. You know, everybody thought that, yeah, law was stressful, but the money's good, and you can, you know, if you're really focused, you don't have to worry about that so much. The science started to catch up with us.
Hmm.
We started to understand what it does to your brain, and and as a result, and this first study in 2016, the American Bar Association realized that they had a real problem on their hands. And so they initiated all of these programs to educate lawyers about the dangers of the stress, how to recognize the symptoms of burnout, how to uh, deal with it. But the problem with it was is that we really didn't know that much about what was happening in the brain. And about the time I burned out, the science started to investigate the effects of stress on the brain. And they
Hmm.
did, and for the last 20 years, they've done quite a bit of research on stress, anxiety, depression, and what it does to our behavior. And quite honestly, it's been a godsend because what they found out is that it is a real problem, but it can be easily uh, dealt with. It can be resolved.
Is the stress more created by you, or what? Where does the stress come from for lawyers? And I would assume that it's fair to say this is for other people as well. But where does the stress actually come from?
It comes from your autonomic nervous system, and I didn't know that much about it. I've certainly heard of fight or flight syndrome.
Hmm.
With all this research that they've done into the brain, they've pretty much filled in the blanks about what's going on with your autonomic nervous system, which is a distinct part of your brain. It's the reptilian brain that was the original brain. The brain's gone through several evolutions, but this is the original. This is when we climbed out of the ooze and we had a couple of cells in our body that were basically designed to alert of us from danger and to protect us from danger. And that through trial and error, through evolution, these brain cells organize themselves into the what's now known as a reptilian brain, and it's the automatic response that our brain uh, responds to perceived threat.
Okay.
And so there are two parts to this autonomic nervous system. There's a sympathetic nervous system, which I refer to as the fight or flight response, and I call it the warrior mode. And the warrior mode kicks in automatically without any conscious thought when our brain processing centers encounter something it considers dangerous and doesn't feel safe. And it goes to your amygdala, then it goes to your hippocampus, and then you start sorting through all of this data. And because it doesn't have anything to do with your conscious thought, it's instinctive, it is automatic. That's what kept us alive because the organisms were sitting there facing predators that didn't have this part of the brain kick in and protect itself with fight or flight, then it didn't survive very long.
Hmm.
It was just by, Darwin theory, the reason we're here is because we had that part of the brain that kept us, that helped us survive. Now, there's another part to the autonomic nervous system, which is called the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's the healthy part of the autonomic nervous system. That's our default system. That's where we should be most of the time. And this is the part of the brain that regulates our serotonin, our melatonin, our oxytocin, our dopamine, all of the feel good chemicals that helps our brain to think and rationalize, and we can communicate, we can uh, com- uh, what is it, be flexible,
Hmm.
and we can be in community. And the reason that humans are a little bit different than most animals is that we created civilization. And the only reason we were able to create civilization is because of this sympathetic nervous or parasympathetic nervous system. And I call that the guru mode. So you've got the guru mode, which produces all of the wonderful chemicals and hormones in our brain. And we've got the warrior mode, which produces two things, adrenaline and cortisol. And those are very, very powerful chemicals that are designed to put us into hyperdrive. And this is why wives who see a car roll over their baby can lift the car up and get the baby out from under it, or people who are in danger can do all of these superhuman feats. That's because they're pumping huge amounts of adrenaline and cortisol into their system. So the problem with it is two problems with that. One is it's only designed to last for a few minutes.
Right.
Best case scenario, you get yourself out of the problem and then you go and switch over to the guru mode where you can relax and you can contemplate and you can make sense of what happened. Your frontal cortex kicks in and you can have rational thought about what's happening. But if you stay in the warrior mode, like a lot of lawyers, because they're constantly dealing with crisis and chaos, and their brains interpret all of that. The fact that their client is in danger isn't a predator coming at the lawyer; it's a predator coming at the client. But the lawyer's brain will interpret that just as if that predator was coming at them. They take it personally, in other words.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. They take it personally.
Yeah, and so it kicks in the warrior mode, and the body floods with adrenaline and cortisol. If the research has shown that if you have adrenaline and high levels of adrenaline and cortisol in your body for long periods of time, it's very destructive to your body.
Hmm.
And so what happens is that these people who, and quite frankly, the reason that lawyers are more at risk than a lot of other professions is because they care so much. And they care about their clients and they care about what happens to their clients. And they take that emotion into their in themselves, and that actually produces a warrior response in their bodies, and they may not even know it.
Hmm.
It can be quite thrilling actually when you are confronted and you successfully deal with the problem. That adrenaline rush and cortisol rush is very exciting. The problem with it is that it's also very destructive to your organs, to your nervous system. And eventually, that's why you burn out, is because you put your body under such stress that it can't handle it for years and years and years. And if you don't do something about it, if you don't notice that something's wrong and you continue going on this cycle of reacting and stressing out and uh, getting excited, your brain will actually shut down because that's what it's designed to do. And so what I do is I help explain to lawyers, well, here are the symptoms of burnout. Here are the symptoms of PTSD. Here are the symptoms of secondary trauma, which lawyers get and their staff gets because they have to witness some pretty horrible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Personal injury cases can be quite graphic, and they're very disturbing. And unless you know what's going on in your brain, you're not well equipped to deal with it. And a lot of lawyers just shrug it off and say, well, that's the cost of making a lot of money.
Yeah.
But it's not. You don't
Yeah.
have to go through that. And so I teach them and the term I use is teach people how to hack their brain, which means that there are physical techniques you can do that will stop you from going into this guru or warrior cycle.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to get to, is that in reality, we're a very malleable race of creatures. But I think more important, we are a race of creatures that can use that and learn how to deal with different situations that come along. So how do you, not wanting a lawyer to become a Mr. Spock and become unemotional, but still, it would seem to me that there are ways to address and deal with all of this so that they don't have to go into the warrior mode. How do you do that?
Again, you have to educate them about what's happening in their brain and explain to them that the warrior mode is okay in short bursts. But when you're aware of your stress levels and you're aware that it's been going on for long periods of time, then you have to do something about it.
So how do they get rid of all that stress?
Well, what you do is there's a nerve that runs from the back of your brain to all the way into your lower extremities, and they're connected to all your organs, all your glands, everything, and it's called the vagus nerve. And this vagus nerve is basically how the brain communicates with the rest of the body. What they found out is that if you activate the vagus nerve, if you excite the vagus nerve, it goes into guru mode, calms things down. Because when you're in warrior mode, it shuts the vagus nerve down. And the problem with that is that it shuts down your digestive system. It shuts down it raises your heart rate. It can damage your heart. And that's why you have to be aware of this stuff, or you're going to be at risk of burning out.
Well, and that gets us back to the whole discussion of information as opposed to knowledge. And how do you get people to assimilate that and get them to take it to heart so that they do what really needs to be done to activate the vagus nerve?
Well, I get their attention by telling them they can make more money. Because
Okay.
what is, if they're stressed out all the time, they're not working at their optimum potential.
Okay.
And the idea here is to get them to calm down and to think rationally and use their intuition, use their inspiration, use their imagination, because that is what I think separates some really good lawyers from the really great lawyers, is because they have access to all areas of their brain. And when you're in warrior mode, you have limited access to your rational brain. And the way you can tell is that when you're in warrior mode, it's you often are prone to panic attacks.
Mm.
You have memory lapses. You're focused on one thing and you can't really uh, focus on anything else. And so what happens is they get shut into this basically uh, panic mode, and they're making bad decisions, and they're not doing their clients any good. They're certainly not doing the best job that they could. And because the studies will show that when you're relaxed, you're using more of your frontal lobe, more of your brain lights up than when you're stressed. Because if you look at a MRI of the brain, when it's stressed, it looks like it's shut down. There are
Mm.
only areas that are lit up. You look at someone who's relaxed and rational, and a much greater part of your brain is being used. So you're smarter, you have more options, you can conceive of solutions and problem solve, because you cannot problem solve when you're in warrior mode because that part of your brain is shut down.
Hmm.
So there, just to give you some examples of the things you can do, I actually did a TEDx talk on this. But the thing that people have to understand is that when they are shut down, if they're in a negative mindset, if they are traumatized in any way, either secondarily or directly, then they have to pay attention to their body. And one of the best ways to pay attention to their body is to relax and to meditate. Now, there are some physical things you can do that will automatically excite your vagus nerve, and that will take you out of warrior mode and into your guru mode. So, one is, interestingly enough, is to smile.
Hmm.
And smiling will activate facial nerves that are connected to the cranial nerves that are connected to the vagus nerve. So if you smile, then, and I'm not talking about a small smile, I'm just talking
Right.
about a big, show your teeth, like
Right.
a like my daddy would say, like a mule eating briars. You have to make the facial muscles move, which will activate the nerves and are connected to your vagus nerve.
I don't know
So,
how true it is, but someone once said to me, it takes 17 muscles to frown and only 3 to smile. So I don't know how true that is, but I understand the concept behind it, which is we should really be smiling a whole lot more than we do.
and you can reverse engineer it, because even if you're in a bad mood and you smile, things relax.
Yeah,
Your
which is the point.
whatever it is stressing you will calm down.
Okay.
And and plus, there's a feedback loop that if you're smiling, the people around you will smile.
Sure, they will.
And, as we know, if you walk into a room and you're bent over and you're frowning and you're aggressive, people are going to run away
Yeah.
because you're a threat. And body language shows that you're a threat. You walk in upright with your smile on your face, people are going to come up to you and want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so it's a much more pleasant experience. The next thing you can do is, and I actually sang a song on my TEDx talk, and it goes like this. If you're happy and you know it, overthink. If you're happy and you know it, overthink. If you're happy and you know it, give your brain a chance to blow it. If you're happy and you know it, overthink. So that's a silly little ditty,
Yeah.
but
But
it has a very pronounced effect on your vagus nerve. And that is because your voice box is right next to your vagus nerve. That's why we like to sing in church. That's why we like why meditators like to chant mantras like
Mm-hmm.
Om. The deeper you go when you chant Om, the more vibration is affecting your vagus nerve. That makes you feel better. That makes
Mm-hmm.
you calm down and makes you relax. That's why monks chant, is to get them in a proper frame of mind so that they can understand reality and the truths of the universe. So if we all we have to do is sing in the shower, um, before you go to work, or sing in the car on the way to work, and I guarantee you, you will feel a lot better when you get to work than if you sat there driving along dreading everything that's going to happen.
Yep.
Um, Another thing you can do is, and this is really counterintuitive, is take a cold shower, because cold water activates all the nerves in your skin, which are attached to your vagus nerve. And so by taking a cold shower, it's almost like a reboot.
Mm.
If you're really in a bad mood and you are really angry or you're really upset or afraid about something, go take a cold shower, because I know you've heard people saying you just need to go take a cold shower.
Yeah.
Well, there's a neurological reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the cold water will shock your vagus nerve and will throw you into your guru mode. And that way you can get out of whatever the mood was you're in that was making you such uh, tense and aggressive person. And you don't have to take a shower. You can just put cold water on your face,
Sure.
wash your hands, and that sort of thing. Um, there's another technique called the forearm rub, where if you take your shirt, well, you can actually do it with your shirt on, but if you want to, just take your hands and rub the tops of your forearms, and we're
Like,
back and forth, back and forth.
yeah.
And what that does is it excites the nerves that are attached to the vagus nerve. And it also is a memory of what your mother used to do when she was holding you.
Mm-hmm.
And it calms you down so fast, it's amazing. There's lots of different things you can do. Certain yoga poses will activate your vagus nerve. There's a number of different physical things you can do. But the point is that you don't turn the autonomic nervous system on or off by thinking about it. You can
Right.
actually, if you spend a lot of time worrying about stuff, you will shut down your vagus nerve.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't get out of your warrior mode into your guru mode by just saying, snap out of it. What you have to do is you have to do something physical to activate your vagus nerve so that it will shift you from the warrior mode over to guru mode. And then you can start relaxing, you can start problem solving, and you can start doing a better job.
We talked some time ago when we first met about and I mentioned the book I wrote last year, Live Like a Guide Dog. And the basic premise of the book is that people are so afraid of everything because they try to influence everything under the sun and they can't. And so they become afraid of it and they allow fear to overwhelm them rather than stepping back and learning techniques that will allow them to recognize that fear can be a very powerful tool that you can control and that you can use to help you focus, which is, I think, another way of saying a lot of what you're saying. And the problem is that people just won't do it. They won't, for example, spend time at night just thinking about what happened today. Why was I afraid of this? What am I going to do the next time it comes up? And and take the time to learn and listen to our own inner voices that will tell us what we need to do. We just don't do that very often. We're not taught to do that kind of thing. And so we're really taught to be much more fearful than we need to be.
You're exactly right. And there's another aspect to this that I should mention, and that's a term called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to physically change itself
Mm-hmm.
based on what kind of thoughts you're thinking. Because if you think a certain thought over and over and over again, you are going to create synapses in your brain that will make that thought more and more and more repetitive. And that's why people who have a lot of fear, they're probably because of something they experienced in their past,
Mm-hmm.
they're carrying into the future. And they don't want that to happen again, so they obsess on it.
Yeah.
And I call it worst case scenario thinking rather than best case scenario thinking.
Right.
Worst case scenario thinking actually is something that lawyers do very well
Yeah.
because they are trained to anticipate problems and how to deal with it. Especially if you're a trial lawyer, you're always thinking, well, what if somebody says this? How do I object to that? What do I base my objection on? What if somebody doesn't show up? They're constantly running scenarios in their mind
Over
and,
which they have absolutely no control.
and none of it's going to probably happen.
Right.
It's their imagination going to the dark side. And so what happens is because of neuroplasticity, the more you think these thoughts, the more you're going to think these thoughts.
Yep.
And so what you have to do is you have to change your mind, literally change your mind. And what that means is you have to change the types of habitual thoughts that you allow in your brain.
Yeah.
So if you are someone who is got childhood trauma, you've probably dealt with that the best way you could, but you also, if you haven't had therapy or coaching, you probably carried it into your adult life.
Yeah.
And you're still dealing with those childhood issues, but on a much more adult and complicated scale. And what happens is once again, your brain gets used to that. And like any other habit, when a brain gets used to a habitual thought, it will continue to have that thought until you force it not to have that thought.
Yeah.
That means you have to replace it. You have to replace it with something else. The problem is that because you become used to it and it's become normalized, and your brain thinks that is the way it's supposed to be. So when you try to replace that negative thought with another thought, your brain is going to resist.
Yeah.
Because that's not normal and it will feel very uncomfortable. You may even have physical sensations that will try to convince you not to change that habitual thought. Some people call it, I'd rather have the fear I know than the fear that I don't know. Or I'd rather have the pain that I have rather than the fear of not knowing what's going to happen. So we tend to get in these ruts, and that can cause your brain to shift right over into a warrior mode, and you become very aggressive, you become very combative, and you react with anger and all the other negative emotions, guilt, shame, remorse. And that just is not a sustainable plan for how you want to succeed in life.
Yeah.
Because you have to be positive if you're going to succeed in anything.
And it's just so unfortunate that we don't learn this as much as we should, as early as we should, or as well as we should. And it's just so much not a part of humanity, which is so unfortunate. I keep going back to weather forecasters. I listen to the weather out here in California regularly, and it's amazing. If it's raining outside, it's doom and gloom. When is this going to end? if it's hot and sunny outside, when is it going to cool off? There's no way to satisfy these people, and they, by doing what they do, they teach people, and they continue to promote this whole attitude of fear about everything, which is so unfortunate.
Well, they have to be able to understand the difference between rational fear and irrational fear,
Yeah.
because rational fear is healthy. Because otherwise, rational fear is putting your hand on a flame or in
Yeah.
a fire. The rational fear is what prevents you from doing that. Irrational fear is when we become afraid of things that aren't real, like what's going to happen a month from now, or what's going to happen if such and such happens, or what if something unpleasant happens or happened in the past. You don't want that to happen again. So, but rather than think of ways to avoid that, all you do is obsess on being afraid of
Mhm.
it again. And that's just basically the brain, an untrained mind at work.
Mhm. So
And
how do you deal with the lawyers who, and I can appreciate this sort of by definition, do need to do what ifs about what goes on with their cases and so on, but they ought to be able to do that in a way that doesn't necessarily create stress.
well, first of all, I would say that they have to plan their day, because what happens is that
That's a good point.
uh, if they're allowing themselves just to think these irrational thoughts, that something bad, what am I going to do if something bad happens? Now, there's also a distinction between thinking of things that going wrong and knowing what to do if they do.
Mm-hmm.
That's just good planning.
Sure.
The thing that most people tend to obsess on is things that happen that they don't know what to do. Unforeseen things and unplanned things and stuff that just you don't know what to do at the time when it happens. And so they're afraid of something like that happening in the future.
Rather
And again,
than, yeah, go ahead.
and so, and they don't make any effort to find a solution.
Mm-hmm.
They just would rather obsess on that thought in their minds because it's pumping adrenaline into their system and it's very exciting, and they become addicted to adrenaline and cortisol.
Yeah.
People don't understand they can get addicted to these chemicals that they're producing in their brain. And so when adrenaline's not pumping, they go through withdrawal. And so what do? They start manufacturing crises so they could get the adrenaline flowing again. And there's a lot of times that I personally would create chaos uh, by sending an ill-advised email or saying something to somebody that probably wasn't the kindest thing to say. Or throwing an emotional hand grenade into the room just for excitement.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are addicted to this and they don't even know it.
I spoke last October in London at the Business Continuity Institute's hybrid conference on resilience and business continuity. And when I was preparing for it, the one of the people who brought me in said, the business continuity person is the person who's the what if person. If there's ever going to be an emergency and so on, they're not paid attention to until there's an emergency, but then they're the ones that have to have thought about what's the solution going to be. And thinking about all that you're saying, and recognizing how so many of these people operate, they spend a lot of time thinking about, if this particular situation happens, how should we respond? And they think about it in a much more rational way. They're not doing it by any means totally emotionally, and I'm sure that they feel emotion, but they're really working to plan, which is a much more productive way of solving the problem.
Oh, you couldn't be more correct. I think that um, actually a couple of aspects of that that come to mind. Number one is these people they're not worrying about the problem. They're
Right.
problem solving.
Right.
So they are engaging the guru side of their mind
Right.
and also the dopamine centers of their brain. Because what they're doing is they're thinking of tasks that they can accomplish. And once they do that, then they go on to the next task.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why some lawyers are so very good is because they're very good problem solvers. And they're thinking ahead of the game and they're looking at things that can go wrong. And so they come up with a problem solve, or come up with a solution. Now, the other part to that is that some lawyers will think of a problem and they won't focus on the solution. They'll just
Mm-hmm.
focus on the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not, really contemplating not using the cause. And when you're focusing on the problem, you're probably edging over into the warrior mode
Yeah.
and you're getting cut off from your imagination, your intuition, and your inspiration.
Yeah.
Those creative parts of your mind that also separate good lawyers from great lawyers, because the great lawyers are in the zone. They know what they're doing. They're
Yeah.
confident, and they don't go into fight or
Fight or
flight.
flight. Yeah. Right.
They focus on the problem solving.
Well,
Now the
and
other
you,
one is
oh, go ahead.
planning on avoiding the problem in the first entirely. I mean, and that takes, that's also a part of problem solving, is that how do you prevent this from happening
Mm-hmm.
rather than what do we do if it happens? And
Well, and
so,
you may come to the conclusion that you can't prevent it, but you're thinking about it in a rational way, which also takes you to the point where you can take the step of, okay, so if it does happen, this is what we'll do.
and for most people, if they are in their guru mode, this is not a lengthy conversation or in your head, and it's not a lengthy conversation in meetings. But you ask what do people do when they get to this point. One of the other things is teamwork,
Mm-hmm.
because really good lawyers have great teams behind them, and they can uh, problem solve. They can um, play tennis with it. They can question and answer, and they can work out a solution, because two minds is like 1 + 1 = 11.
Yeah.
And you can get a lot more done with your team than if you sit there in your office and you're looking at your desk and you're trying to figure out a solution to something. And all you really need to do is get your team together and brainstorm it. Because that's, once again, brainstorming is a classic form of guru mode.
Yeah.
You're sitting there, you're feeling safe, you're figuring things out, you're coming up with solutions. And that's the best aspect of our brains, because that's what got us to the top of the food chain,
Right.
is that we can solve problems.
You also said something very interesting earlier about planning your day and thinking about your day. And maybe you devote 10 or 15 minutes to just thinking about the problems with the idea that maybe a solution will come through. Maybe you go into warrior mode while you're thinking those thoughts. But after 15 minutes, you go, okay, I'm done with that. I'm going to go back and work on other things.
Exactly.
But that also gets your brain thinking about what needs to be done. And as you go back more into the guru mode, and if you learn to listen for it, you'll get the answers that you need.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm actually launching a new program with my partner, uh, not my law partner, but a teaching partner, Pamela Deneuve, and it's called the Millionaire Lawpreneur Blueprint. And we're going to teach lawyers how to make the most effective use of their time, how to be the most incredible lawyer that they can be.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is planning. Most lawyers, at least when I was growing up, really didn't have a plan. They just went at it full tilt bozo and did more multitasking and took everything and tried to carry it around like a dozen spinning plates. And the thing is, that's not how you make a lot of money being a lawyer.
Mm-mm.
So what we do is we find there are a number of different time management programs or strategies that there's the Pomodoro technique, which is you work for 45 minutes and then you take a 5 minute break.
Mm-hmm.
There's an Eisenhower technique where you work for like 3 hours and then take a half-hour break. But the point is to focus. The point is to focus on one problem at a time because all of the studies show that multitasking is the least efficient way to do work.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we will plan out an optimum plan for them. And there's also some things that they can do both with their personal time and their office time to make it less stressful. A lot of people don't know how to relax.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how to wind up. So we teach people how to go to bed. We teach people how to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things are scientifically proven to have a huge benefit for your state of mind, your mental acuity, your ability to remember stuff, and it will actually prolong your life.
One thing
Because,
that go ahead.
no, I was just going to say because the one thing that stress does is it will shorten your lifespan.
It will. One of the things that I have become a great proponent for is take time at the end of the day, as I said earlier, to think about what happened today, and do it while you're falling asleep. So you're already in bed, and you think about it as you drift off to sleep. What worked? What didn't work? Even the stuff that worked, could I have done it better? The stuff that didn't work, I stay away from terms like failure. I don't believe in failure. I do believe that we do something that doesn't work out. Okay, what do we learn from that? And we have to ask ourselves those questions, and we have to take the time to really ask ourselves the questions, and not in a fearful way, but say, all right, Michael, what was the problem here? Why was I afraid of it? How do I fix it for next time? And if we do that, invariably we're training our brains to give us those answers, and we can get them from that inner voice that we talked about earlier, and all that information is available if we'll learn to listen for it.
Great point. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do
Yeah.
to wind down the day. Like, what are the takeaways? And look at it like, okay, that didn't turn out. And I agree with you. There's no such thing as failure. It's just unintended results.
Yeah.
And so what did I learn from this and how can I do it better? So
Even if it was a good
those,
thing, even if it was a good thing,
it's a learning lesson.
it is.
And so you become a better person, become a smarter person. That's where experience is so much more value than information.
Right.
So you know that it may have seemed like a good idea at the time, but it didn't turn out as you intended. So let's not do that again.
Yeah. And what do we do next time? Because there'll be a next time.
Definitely. We will always repeat our lessons till we learn them.
Yeah.
And so, and most people don't really understand how powerful they are.
Yeah.
They don't understand that they are creating most of what they experience. And if they would give themselves the grace and the acknowledgement that they can accomplish whatever they put their talents and their mind and their efforts to, then they don't have to spend all their time worrying and being anxious and being afraid.
Yeah.
Because they're basically, fear is a place that people go when they don't have anything, they don't know what to do.
And they shut down.
Exactly. And
I've taught myself over the last 2 years to never say I'm my own worst critic because it's such a negative thing, but rather to say I'm my own best teacher, which is always positive.
Exactly. And that's how you have to look at it, because that's, people may or may not understand how important mindset is. And
Hmm.
mindset is what you think about during the day.
Right.
You can, and I told somebody today, in fact, that all free will is the ability to make choices about how we evolve.
Right.
So every day we're making a couple 100,000 decisions, what clothes to wear, when to get up, what to say, what to think. All of these things are controlled by us. And
Yep.
that's one of the few things we can control is what we think about.
Hmm.
And so that's, you know, a lot of complications to that theory is that, have you been traumatized in the past?
Yeah.
Or are you going through a traumatic time right now? Because that affects the way you think
Yep.
and you have to deal with it.
But you can deal with it.
Yes,
We're powerful
absolutely.
enough to be able to deal with it.
Exactly.
Why is it that people need to know about spirituality?
Because they don't know where their place is if they don't. Because their spirituality answers all of those questions that we want to know is, why am I here? Who am I? Uh, what is my destiny? All of that spirituality is what I call the big picture. And it is a belief system that honors and values our life.
Mm.
Because if you don't have that, then you're going to be a victim. You're going to be in your warrior mode all the time, and you're not going to understand what's going on because you're not able to look from a higher perspective. And that higher perspective is spirituality. And spirituality can be a religion, spirituality can be a meditation, spirituality can be just not thinking. I have exercises where I teach people how to not think, because if their thinking has gotten so out of control that they can't control it, then what you have to do is you have to shut it down for microseconds, then seconds, then minutes, and then multiple minutes. And it reboots your brain. Because if you're on a negative thought train and you can shut it, you can stop it, then you can control your thoughts. And I've worked with lots of spiritual teachers. I've worked with a lot of academics about how do you control your thoughts. A lot of people talk about mastering your thoughts. Well, you can't master them unless you can detach from them.
Hmm.
Most people don't know that they are not their thoughts. They're two different, your awareness is completely different from your thoughts. And you can try it, because you can sit there and think, well, why did I think that thought? Who's that? Where's that coming from? And just, I've always been taught that thoughts are like the clouds in the sky, and your awareness is like the sun. So the thoughts are either covering up and interfering with your light, or they're dividing and letting the sun shine through and
Hmm.
letting your inner light, in other words, come through. But all of those are spiritual theories that help people understand why the world is the way that it is.
Right.
And the thing is that we are not here to control it uh, in a macro sense. We're here to control it on a micro sense, in that we can control what happens to us. We can control what we think about. We can't control what anybody else thinks about, and we can't control what happens to anybody else.
And we may
So,
not be able to totally control what happens to us vis-a-vis the World Trade Center, but even so, we absolutely have control over how we deal with it.
yes, and I think that we there's still a lot of things we don't understand
Yeah.
that spirituality can help explain.
How
Because
does, oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
How does spirituality help high achievers? Because a lot of people want to be high achievers, and clearly spirituality is a message that you're bringing that it's valuable in terms of concepts. So how does that help high achievers?
I think it gives a purpose, a positive purpose for their effort. And that if achievers have a motivation to help rather than to a selfish or a revenge kind of motivation,
Mm,
they're going to be much more effective. And I think that they'll be a much better businessman because when you're coming, motivation is just as important as behavior, and probably more so because the ends, the means justify the ends. And so if you've got a spiritual background, if you're doing things to help people, your life is going to be a lot easier. You're going to accomplish a lot more than if you're a victim and you're constantly complaining about what the world's doing to you.
right.
So, and it's basically an attitude. It's your personality. It's all these things that make us so different but so similar.
Yeah. And all of this makes a lot of sense. It makes perfect sense. And it certainly is something that people really should take to heart. And I hope that they will. If people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
My website is jamesgrayrobinson.com,
That works.
and they can get in touch with me there.
Well,
And it also has a full list. I've got 15 books. I've made 4 movies. I've got lots of courses, lots of events. We're launching all these really exciting new programs that will help people tremendously. And so, the thing is that I've learned an awful lot in my life, and I've learned an awful lot how not to do things. And so I'm trying to focus this part of my life on teaching people how to do things.
yeah,
Because I think we're so afraid of making a mistake that we don't allow ourselves to really fly.
yeah. And we are so afraid of making mistakes that we don't leave ourselves open to the possibility that we may make one, which can teach us so much.
Well, you go back to our agreement that there are no such things as mistakes.
Right. Right.
That's where you can really make some ground by realizing that you can't do it wrong. You'll just find another way to do it.
I like, from Star Wars, I like Yoda, do or do not, don't try.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing is that you will, I always say I get to where I am by following my nose.
Yep.
It's like I've just kept breathing. Well, you want a survival technique? Keep breathing.
Keep breathing. That works every time.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for spending all this time with us. Can you believe it's been over an hour? My gosh, time flies when you're having fun.
Well, this is what really gets me going. I love to talk about this stuff, and I love to teach people how to improve their lives. And I really appreciate you allowing me on your show because I know that you're doing such great work, and I'm honored to be a part of that.
I think we'll just have to do another one.
I've got more.
I'll bet you do. Keep track of what we did, and I will do my best because we'll do another one. And I'd love to make that happen. In fact, if you still have the link, or I can send it to you. Let's set it up.
Okay, sure.
Well, I hope all of you out there have enjoyed this. I hope you've learned from it. I will be very grateful that you do. I'd love to hear from you as to what you think of today. Please feel free to email me, Michael H.I. at accessibe.com. And I hope that you like this well enough that you'll give us a 5-star rating wherever you're watching or listening to the podcast. If you know of anyone who might be a good guest for us, people who have stories and want to tell them, And of course, James, you as well. Excuse me, Sir James, you as well. Love to be introduced to anyone who you think would be a good guest for the podcast. So don't hesitate to let us know about folks. We're always looking for more people to come on, and gives me an opportunity to learn. And again, James, I just want to thank you for being here. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Michael.